Writing about our patients, whose story is it? You are listening to ReachMD, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Dr. Sayantani DasGupta, your host. With me today is nurse practitioner and award-winning poet Courtney Davis, who has kindly come to join us here in New York City, all the way from snowy Connecticut. Courtney Davis is the author of 3 poetry collections and has co-edited 2 collections of poetry by nurses, and is the author of a memoir about her work in women's health entitled I Know a Woman, 4 Women Patients and Their Female Caregiver. Welcome, Courtney Davis. Thank you for joining us.
Sayantani. It's wonderful to be with you.
You are a nurse practitioner and a poet and work with many physicians who are poets and fiction writers and prose writers. Do you think that there is a difference between nurses who write and doctors who write?
Well, I think that many years ago when I first joined the medical humanities world, it certainly is a world of its own, I was very interested in what nurses had to say about their work. And I think for a long time I saw a great division between what doctors wrote about and what nurses wrote about. And in the beginning, many, many years ago, when literature and medicine was sort of new, I really felt that there was a rift between us, that nurses were doing something in literature and doctors were doing something else.
Is that related to the different work that nurses and doctors necessarily do with patients?
I think so. I think what I was confusing in my mind was our duties versus our emotional response to our duties. And I think what I've come to understand through reading much of what physicians have to say in poetry and prose, and by writing more myself and by becoming more acquainted with nurses' writing, is that we really share a common emotional ground within the larger realm of caregiving. And that while our duties with the patient may differ, our emotions about what we do and our impulse to write, our impulse to put this down in words is very, very similar. So that over the years I've really come to see that doctors and nurses are colleagues in the writing world as well as in the caregiving world. And although we're writing about different topics, we are writing with the same energy, the same emotion, the same suffering, the same sorrow, the same love for our patients. I wrote a little bit about that in I Knew a Woman. So if you'd like me to read that,
I'd be delighted.
I think that what all caregivers share is much greater than what separates caregivers in their writing. This is a section in I Knew a Woman, and I'm writing about a time when I was in the operating room having a breast biopsy. I was not sleeping. I had a local anesthetic, so I was awake and I was thinking. And of course, I wrote this later, not at that time. There was one thing I realized that joined us there in that room, the doctor, the nurse, the scrub tech, and me. We were all hungry to know the microcosm of the body, to solve its riddles and understand its intricacies. At various times, we had all rejoiced when the body's hidden parts had willingly revealed themselves. There was the tortuous ear canal we could peer into with our little lights, and the body's hallways, vagina and throat, and long, sinuous vessels we could navigate with shiny steel instruments and flexible catheters. There was elastic muscle and tissue, and the intestines translucent and the gorgeous color of salmon. And there was the skin, which guarded its contents fiercely, yet, when necessary, yielded easily to the knife. I love the body, I thought from deep in my foresty shelter, even when it betrays us. I remembered the many courageous patients I'd known during my years in healthcare, and the many unforgettable moments I'd experienced, moments of horror or astonishing acts of love. And I think that it's those wonderful moments that we share with doctors, with nurses' aides, with psychiatrists, with the orderly, with the woman who delivers the flowers to the patient's room. We all have our moments with patients, and we all have our ways of remembering them and writing about them.
But you are the co-editor of 2 collections of poetry by nurses. And in one of them, Between the Heartbeats, Joanne Troutman Banks, who is,
Yes.
godmother in this world of literature and medicine, and who, sadly, we've recently lost, writes this marvelous introduction about the unique work that nurses do. She says, "The truth is that when we are sick, very sick, it is often the nurse who is closest to our bodies, minds, and souls. She is closer than today's doctor, who is in and out too fast, closer than the hospital chaplain, who doesn't stick around for the telling physical details, sometimes closer even than the family, who can't face all the secrets that illness uncovers. So why don't we know what the nurse thinks about all this intimacy? Nurses' voices are not clearly heard in medical novels, films, and television, where, as in life, doctors dominate. Do you think that that is the case even now?
I think it's less true now than it was when we published Between the Heartbeats. I think at that time, the doctor's voice was coming into being in a very strong and very admired way. And nurses were silent. And they were certainly writing, but they weren't publishing their work, and their work was not being honored as the work of physicians was. And my co-editor, Judy Schaefer, and myself said, we have to do something about this. We have to get those nurses' voices out there. And I think that there's always been, I think that in the patient's mind, the doctor is the one who cures. The doctor is the one who holds the secret to life and death. But the nurse is the one who tends. And the nurse, whether it's a male or a female, is often the one who accompanies the patient throughout the illness, from the beginning of an illness to the end of an illness. The nurse tends the body, often in very maternal ways. And this difference in tending, I think in the past, has led to the nurse's work being perhaps less valued in the larger community than the physician's work. I think now that nurses are writing in great numbers and writing beautifully about what they do, their work is being honored in the world of literature and medicine, so that literature and medicine is perhaps not even the correct title anymore. It's the medical humanities, it's the medical and nursing humanities. But I think it's that staying with the patient through all phases of their illness and tending their bodies that makes the difference. But yes, I think that now nurses' writing is much more recognized and honored than it was.
If you're just joining us, you are listening to the Clinicians Roundtable on ReachMD, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Dr. Sayantani DasGupta, and I'm speaking with nurse practitioner and poet Courtney Davis, and we're discussing medicine and nursing and literary writing. What do you think the literary writing of nurses holds for physician readers? Why should physicians be reading the writing of nurses, which I think they should?
Well, I think that one thing I notice that nurses, when they write, are a little more physical, a little more sensual, meaning using the senses, often more present in their writing than in the doctor's writing. Now, I'm making a blanket statement, which of course is not always true. But I think because nurses tend the body in a different way, they're more apt to put those bodily details in their poetry. I think nurses are also a little more open about their grief that they share with patients, whereas physician writers sometimes feel that they have to maintain the power of the healer. I think nurses are often more able to collapse a little bit under the weight of the grief and say, I just can't do anything. I can't save this patient.
Even though grief is such a part of what physicians experience,
yes.
what all of us
yes.
as caregivers experience.
And so perhaps nurses have been, in their early writings, a little better about expressing the body, expressing the grief. But I think physicians and nurses now are writing in very similar ways, much more open. I see so much openness now in physicians' writing. And I see so much more craft now in nurses' writing, so that it's almost we've equalized the playing field. The doctors who were very well crafted and wrote beautiful poetry, but often was missing that emotional core, and nurses who often wrote very emotional poetry, but it might have been missing that craft. Now I think we've come together and we have become truly good writers in our poetry and our prose, both physicians and nurses.
Well, there are forums now in which physicians and nurses and family members and people experiencing illness can get together and write. And you teach at one of these summer writing institutes, Writing the Medical Experience.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience and tell me the sorts of advice you give to caregivers who write.
The poem What the Nurse Likes is one of my favorite poems because it was so surprising. This poem was written at a time when I just didn't have anything to write about, and I thought, I have to write a poem. So I gave myself an assignment, which I've given to the people, by the way, at Writing the Medical Experience, just to make a list of something. And I made a list about what I liked about nursing, and I was shocked by the poem, What the Nurse Likes. I like looking into patients' ears and seeing what they can never see. It's like owning them. I like patients' honesty. They trust me with simple things. They wake at night and count heartbeats. They search for lumps. I am also afraid. I like the way women look at me and feel safe. Then I lean across them and they smell my perfume. I like the way men become shy. Even angry men bow their heads when they are naked. I like lifting a woman's hair to place stethoscope to skin, the way everyone breathes differently, the way men make suggestive groans when I listen to their hearts. I like eccentric patients, old women who wear purple knit hats and black eyeliner, men who put makeup over their age spots. I like talking about patients as if they aren't real, calling them the fracture or the hysterectomy. It makes illness seem trivial. I like saying, you shouldn't smoke, you must have this test. I like that patients don't always do what I say. I like the way we stop the blood, pump the lungs, turn hearts off and on with electricity. I don't like when it's over and I realize I know nothing. I like being the one to give bad news. I am not embarrassed by grief. I like the way patients gather their hearts, their bones, their arms and legs that have spun away momentarily. At the end of the gathering, they sigh and look up. I like how dying patients become beautiful. Their eyes concentrate light. Their skin becomes thin and delicate as fog. Nothing matters anymore but sheets, pain, a radio, the time of day. I like watching patients die. First they are living, then something comes up from within and moves from them. They become vacant, and yet their bodies are heavy and sink into the sheets. I like how emptiness is seen first in the eyes, then in the hands. I like taking care of patients, and I like forgetting them, going home and sitting on my porch while they stand away from me, talking among themselves. I like how they look back when I turn their way.
I'd like to thank nurse practitioner and poet Courtney Davis, who has been our guest today. I'm Dr. Sayantani DasGupta, and you've been listening to ReachMD, the channel for medical professionals. We welcome your questions and comments. Please visit us at reachmd.com.